Hey, Ruth. Good evening.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Cool intro, by the
Yeah.
way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to have you on today. And honestly, I think of all the ones that I've topics that I've had so far, this is the one that I kind of like that started. I think as a just a joke between us. Like, wait, that actually might not be a bad idea. Let's actually talk about this for a second. Do we actually want to have a conversation on this? But I think it's going to be a really fun topic today. I know for some context for the people tuning in, I'm sure probably a lot of you are already familiar with Ruth and her Kerbal channel, but she's been doing this for years. You're probably one of the ones up there with like Adam Sachs and almost as far back as like Rob Colley is. You know, you've been producing content for a long time on YouTube comparatively, and at least few more years than certainly the other YouTubers, and about as long as most of the other bloggers. So even back when I was just starting to write a blog post or two and everything else, you'd already had a good healthy channel of stuff. So it was like with a lot of other people, it's nice to actually be able to have some interactions and to have you on here. So I appreciate you joining today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. I'm actually, I learn. I try to learn DAX with Rob and Avi
Mhm.
on this. How is it, Power Pro
Power Pivot
website?
Pro, yeah, P3,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So they were the only ones that I could actually understand something about. So they were before me for sure. And then yeah, I started like 2016, I think. And
Yeah,
by that time, Gaina Cube was Adam. It was just Adam at that time.
yep.
He had already the channel, yeah, and he was
He
quite
was
big already.
he was still in a cube. He was actually in a cube
He
back
was in
then.
a queue, yes.
Yeah.
He was. There were actually two more channels that were very big at that time. It was two channels from Portugal that they are huge today, obviously,
Okay.
because this is a time game. It's the
Yeah,
longer you've been, the bigger your channel or whatever it is going to be. It
exactly.
is what it is. It's not that you're better or worse. It's just that you've been longer.
Yep.
But they are great actually. Those two Portuguese channels, and they were also like massive. They were like 20,000 when I had like 100 subscribers or something.
And
They were
they
very
is it
professional.
and I'm assuming they do all the videos in Portuguese as well, or
Yes. So one of them is Planilleros, and he's been. I think I'm not sure if it is Planilleros. It was first, and then Karina Dolago Datata. But they've been like these two people, but she has the channel for herself, and she has like around. Yeah, I think she's as big as the Power BI channel, like the official one. It's so cool.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's
Yeah,
just
they're
the
smashing it.
well, the thing that I think is just cool is I definitely know that recently with there's like five Miguels that I know in Power BI, but the Spanish community has been certainly absorbing and eating up like content as people are starting to do dedicated uh, language content that's not English. So like I'm very happy to see not only Spanish but a channel that's dedicated to doing something in even in Portuguese is getting nearly as many followers and traction as it is. I know there's some
Yeah,
ones
yeah,
in
yeah.
German and others, but it's I think the second wave that I've seen, or at least that I've been exposed to, I'm sure they've existed well before it started to show up on my Twitter feed. But I'm glad to see that there's a lot of other just non-English channels starting to get a lot of good traction besides just like the primary English ones that at least I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
was
yeah.
the original ones that I was seeing.
Yeah,
A
yeah,
couple
yeah. That is
people are
definitely my.
yeah, a few people by the way because they know you speak Spanish are saying hi and a
Hola.
couple of others. Yeah, so here's one.
Ah, hola. Cuando vuelvo. Ah, yeah, yeah.
No.
I would love to be back very soon to Peru, but
Oh,
pandemic, you know.
so are they asking if you're coming back? I'm going to Peru tonight at 10 p.m. So
You're going to Peru tonight?
I'm going. My friend, one of my best friends, is from Peru. He surprisingly he moved here when he was 16, and I didn't know the first year I knew him that he was Peruvian and moved here because his English is perfect. Absolutely, I thought he
Oh,
maybe
that's
moved
so
here when he
nice.
was a baby. Like, oh no, I was in Peru until I was 16. Like, you have zero accent and you probably speak English better than I do with a large vocabulary. But I get along with him well. So we're gonna do Machu Picchu, the Amazon, and then
Mm.
uh, I'm staying with him and his family for a few days, doing some big Peruvian dinners in Lima and everything. But I'm really excited. I've never been, but I've heard it's one of the most beautiful countries in the world because 20 out of 23 biomes or something that exist in the world are in Peru. Like it has so many different types of nature.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
it is amazing.
yeah, yeah.
And the best of all is the people, you know that. You've already met
Well,
one of them
exactly.
and fell in love, right?
Super, super friendly. Uh, to the Excel or Die in the chat, ping me later on LinkedIn if you can, and I'll give you some details of what because I'll be in Lima for a few days. It looks like he's mentioning that. So yeah, well, let's just chat about that online or offline. But yeah, bringing it back to the topic of the day.
Mm.
For people, for the few people in the chat who are not familiar with you, do you want to give a little background about yourself, kind of what you do, where you've come from?
Yes, yes, yes. So me personally or me professionally?
Both, yeah, because I mean it's
Both,
there,
yeah.
yeah, the all of that.
Yeah, so I'm from Spain, so I should definitely be doing content in Spanish also, like huge steps to the Spanish community for sure. I've moved to Sweden 20 years ago, something like that, so I am based in Sweden now. And I started playing with Power BI around the time it came out, and I thought it was the best thing to do with my time, so I decided I would do it full time. So I've been doing it full time for about 4 years, I think, and started a YouTube channel like we discussed in 2016, and it's went well. So I'm still enjoying Power BI and enjoying doing videos, consulting, and yeah, everything that has to do with data. Actually, I'm like obsessed with Charticulator at the moment. Let's see what will be next.
Yeah, I know you've done quite a few videos on it. I've had Daniel on now once, and actually in about 2 weeks when I'm in Peru, I'm doing a second video with him on Deneb. But have you played around much with his Deneb bespoke visual creator that he created?
Yeah, so the difference for me between Charticulator and Deneb, what I have seen, I haven't played with Deneb yet, is that Deneb is code based, right?
Code
So you
base,
go
quote
to the
unquote.
line
Like
of
it, yeah,
code.
exactly. But at least thankfully, because there's the library of it, you copy and paste, and then you tweak a couple lines to adjust the settings. But it
Mm,
it does require more code writing, but you never have to write it from scratch, which is nice. I was a little
yeah,
uh, apprehensive to try it at first, just because it's code. I don't want to have to learn a new language. And then I realized the only things you're adjusting is that already will say like line color or thickness or anything else out of the template for that type of visual, and you really just tweak a couple of settings to customize it versus Charticulator, which does have more of a UI. But from what Daniel showed me, I love the extra features and some of the additional things that basically he whatever Charticulator doesn't have that he wants, he puts it into Deneb, which
I
is
know.
nice.
I'm so
Yeah,
jealous about it.
I just love how
I
passionate he
think,
is. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think the Charticulator team should actually hire him,
I
like for sure.
Microsoft's
Like with
yeah, good.
no, I was thinking like with maps, the icon map with James, that is just uh, it's the best map that you can have in Power BI or anywhere else. Really, really brilliant. I think they should hire him and put icon map on Power BI. Like seriously, there are
I
some
yeah.
custom visuals. They should not be a custom visual. They should be
Uh,
inbuilt alive, in my
Icon
opinion.
map, HTML viewer for sure. That's another like. I mean, I don't dabble in much HTML outside of what the websites that I made in high school. I know enough to get around, but I've seen like Mike Carlo, who apparently is pretty good with HTML. He's done some mad custom like reports using the HTML viewer because that can be interactive. It's like basically an embedded, iframe that you can have directly into it. And he's added report elements and so many different things using that where I just considered it a way to load an image or something else just on the report page, but they're like he's done some really like black magic things with the
Oh,
HTML
cool.
viewer and
Amazing.
integrating that into like unique buttons and all this other stuff that does really crazy interactions in embedded report pages. I'm sure a lot of hours go into it, but it's
Mm.
impressive what I've seen with that. But I agree. I think Daniel should be uh they should at least consider snatching him up. Microsoft's been vacuuming a lot of MVPs up recently. What we have Chris Webb who went on
Yeah.
Miguel um
Escobar.
Thank you. Yeah, there's so many different last names to flip through that. Miguel Escobar, he's now working with them, and I think going to get involved in Power Query, which is great.
Hmm.
Uh, a couple of, I swear, there's one or two others in the last 12 to 24 months who've also
Yeah,
switched over.
we we had also from Australia, Phil,
Oh, Phil
uh,
Seamark, yeah,
right?
I miss the Dax puzzles. I do miss the little like black magic things that he used to do with his Dax. Like he made a 3D Zelda game. He made a Minesweeper
It
game.
was
Like they're
insane. Yeah,
yeah, very impractical, but still really cool, just to show how
yeah,
customizable the language
yeah,
was.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and
Yeah.
David also.
David Eldersfeld. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. And I think Alex Powers at one point was also non-Microsoft
He
and
was
got.
also an MVP.
I don't know if he was MVP, but I know he was like a somebody in the community that I remember pre Microsoft. They've asked me a couple of times, but my first thing is usually, well, in the U.S. it's like what's the starting like vacation? Oh, 2 weeks, and it's yeah. I travel a lot. It's an addiction. So that's just one of those like it's hard for me to go for to a company as amazing as the people might be or anything else, and just have to downscale the ability to travel or work remote. So that's always been
Mhm.
my polite nose to people most of the time. Um, Back to the subject, I did have a question from one person just quickly on your articulator that you were mentioning. They wanted to, I put it in my queue, not on the screen. Here we go. They wanted to know, are all of your articulator like tutorial videos on your regular channel or a different one?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I battled this for a long time, and I actually had particular videos on my main channel on Curbal. But I realized that people that do Power BI don't necessarily like data visualization, so I decided to separate them. So I have a second channel called Curbal Data Labs,
Okay.
and that's where I put all the data visualization and data literacy and all everything that has to do with that doesn't have to do with a tool with Power BI because Charticulator is a tool.
Yep.
So it is on my second channel. I'm not sure if it's a good decision or not. It's always possible to reverse the decision at some point, but for now, I don't want to bother people that don't want to know about data visualization with on the main channel.
I mean that's the bread and butter that I like to go at. So I've enjoyed a lot of the uh, custom visual and stuff that you've been doing on that channel. Like I like Dax, but Dax is one of those where I think I have to more effortly set aside time to want to read any article, watch any video on Dax because I know I'm gonna have to pay attention. Where
Mm.
I just get excited about visuals and I feel like I can quickly absorb information on it because usually my takeaway is just what is this visual and what is the type of data that I can use it with? Mental note, like, all right, now this is a tool in my belt that in the future, if I come across this data, oh yeah, there is that one visual that can possibly use for that. But I think it's a bit easier to digest without having to, really focus in like, what's the code telling me? I
Mm.
need to think about this while I'm, checking an email or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm actually looking forward when this DAX, how do they call it? Like a DAX Q&A or something
Hmm.
that is coming up next year, I think, where you can actually ask questions. If it works, hallelujah, like seriously, I hope it does work because that would be such a blessing. It's so painful sometimes still to do DAX calculations. It depends on what you're
Yep.
doing, obviously, but
I think it's going to continue to get better and better at probably being able to do advanced calculations easier, which would be, the iterators and time intelligence are probably the two biggest sticking points for people. That's great because that just allows you to do analysis easier. And then I think that will allow us, at least developers, to focus more on curating the report experience to making sure that the report's built with the right visuals laid out, features are implemented, and then also just managing the model, even if it's
mm,
just transforming the data. Because at the end of the day, the best DAX language in the world that can write itself is still useless if it's not being given good quality data that's clean and
yeah,
normalized. Yeah. Um, I,
definitely, definitely.
yeah.
Mm.
I have some people always worried about like, oh no, we're this thing's coming out. It's gonna cause us to like become dated. Well, no, that every time anything is ever introduced, what that opens up is new opportunities, new features, new jobs that come after that. Each time. So you
Mm.
just as long as you continue to ride the wave forward, I don't think there's ever going to be a lack of work. It's just the work changes on what the focus is, and that's good. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
like DAX,
yeah.
but I don't. If I could spend less of my job as a report developer writing DAX, I'm very happy with that. That gives me more time
Yes,
to figure out how to deliver a better visual or a report without having to spend an hour trying to figure out why this number isn't working in against these three fact tables with an iterator function that's being with a switch statement and all that other messy stuff.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. That's very wise because a lot of times we put too much attention on the tool, and we forget what we're actually doing. What we're doing is getting the data to say something to an audience so they can learn something, or they can go and do something, or they can take better decisions, whatever it is. That's the point. Everything
Hmm.
else is just means to an end. So if we could just ask Power BI to give us a calculation and it does, hallelujah. Like, really, how wonderful would that be? Then we can focus on what visual would be most appropriate for the job so that people understand it.
Exactly. And
Or
that's
what is
this.
my data?
Yep. And that's really on like to summarize this a little bit, but I think that's really where like the soft skills mix with a lot of other stuff because yes, there are certain visuals that work well with certain types of data, but then you still have to consider the culture. What are people used to?
Yes.
What's the type of frame of mind that they have, and all of those pieces together, computers can't really like optimize that for you versus like somebody who has the experience to do all that. But yeah, I'm very excited to see back to your thing on just the DAX Q&A that's coming out soon. I do want to actually start like talking about some of the stuff that I think will be a fun discussion today. So for people, we have kind of a list of things that we might share screens a bit, but we're just going to have conversations around a lot of best practices and things where as we were talking about what we could maybe do on a live stream together. What are some examples of you know areas where people kind of say do this or that or think you should, but there is the consultant answer of it depends, which I translate to as you usually need more information. But I think we're going to go through a lot of those, just have a fun open discussion on that. And as well as we talk about that, feel free to drop comments into the chat if you have also ideas of like, hey, what do you think about this quote unquote best practice and what are your opinions on it? And we can go through some of those. But I have my notes up over here, at least on the ones that I came up and then we came up with together. Was there any specific one you wanted to start on, or what was your thinking?
Just shoot.
Yeah, so I mean, like uh, actually, here's one that I know that we actually have a different opinion on. So let's start with the measures folder. Yeah, like that's something that I would say is I call it a best practice for most people. Technically, it is something that is a lot of just personal choice. Uh, for me, as far as like the model organization and everything else goes, and I can even here we go. I will actually show an example just so we can see it here. Give me a sec to actually. There we go. I will merge over to this. Perfect. Yeah. So it's this little folder that I'm referring to right here. We're just having a dedicated measures folder with the icon and the measures sitting at the top. I've just liked that organization where you kind of separate the virtual versus physical layer of the model. Annoyingly, Power BI technically has a measures folder, which is why you can't call any folder measures because that already exists. But there's no option to say show folder. It's buried, and you have to create your own folder for that. But that's at least just showing you what I'm referring to. The flip side of that is people will usually organize it some way in their sales table or anything else. But that's at least giving a little bit of context for what I'm referring to on that. But yeah, I'd say my quick summary for that is I think it's nice that it sorts it separately at the top alphabetically in there. Then you can folder organize additionally below it all of your measures into that. And yeah, I think the primary thing is that I think it helps people learning Power BI. This is not it's not a physical item that's generating data until you use it. It's not adding really any file size out of maybe a couple of bytes to store the formula. So it's not expensive as far as performance or size until it starts to get used individual versus count columns and all that. But I think you prefer to store them probably in the fact tables, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So like
yeah.
I'd love to hear some of the point counterpoint to that. Yeah.
Yes. So uh, in the beginning, when there were no folders, it made sense because there
Hmm.
was no place. You couldn't, put things together that, for example, you were doing time intelligence, a lot of time intelligence. suddenly your fact table became like very big and there were like stuff everywhere and it was just impossible to read. So before folders, I understand that the measure
Hmm.
tables had a purpose, but now with folders, I think as a developer, absolutely, it makes all the sense of the world. You put everything up there, you have it
Hmm.
accessible, and then you have all these weird suffix and prefix to so you can easily access it. So while you are developing, go for it. Wonderful. But from a user perspective, if you are a business user and you know nothing about BI and you know nothing about measures, for me as a business user, when I was a business user, a measure and a dimension and a field, it was the same. It was all the same. It was just things that I could drop
Yeah.
and then things came out, right? So I had no concept of what a layer, measure layer was or visual layer or anything. And most people are like that. So when you want to have sales measures, you go to the sales table, not to a big, I get all types of Power BI files sent to me. And you have this measure table that has like 120 measures in it. No
That does
folders,
bug
no
me.
nothing.
Yes, yeah. Like there, but
And
anything more than maybe like 10, you should start like bucketing it by like time intelligence, or like what I do is in my DAX folder, I will usually have the name of the fact table that it came from. So sales, budget, etc. And then in there, like you can nest folders as much as you want. So like you can go deep, and enterprise models that have like 500 measures, oh yeah, there's going to be 30, 40 tables, but it's easy to quickly navigate, just like a file tree to find the thing that you need.
but if you are creating a folder, it's called sales. Why
Hmm.
don't put it on the sales table already?
Because
Because
that
then
way
you
you,
have to
if,
go sales
yeah.
here to the measure, and then you have to
Hmm.
go sales here for the dimension.
Uh,
Like you're
well,
like going back
the
and forth.
fact the fact table shouldn't usually have dimensions that you're using the fields list, because that would normally come from like the lookup tables. Not 100% of the time, but on any perfect relational data model, you'd have your fact and your dimensions. All displayed values come from dimension, but as we know, there's also, well, probably another situation if it depends. Maybe to actually go into
Exactly.
that a little bit. If there's a dimension on your fact table that is not part of any other hierarchy or anything else, like you don't need a separate dimension table for that, because then you have a dimension table with one column. So then sometimes there are fields that still exist in your fact table that you do drag and drop. For your question of why not just keep it in the sales table, if I have multiple fact tables and a lot of other stuff, I'm usually, whenever I'm grabbing a measure, I'm grabbing 3 or 4 of them, and rather than having to go to a bunch of different tables to get those measures, and it's all based on your own habits and everything. But I find it easy just to grab it from the folders sitting in the DAX table that's sitting at the top.
If we would have probably have business users watching, they probably are wondering
Hmm.
like, what do you mean when you say that fact table should not have any dimensions? Like most people,
Yeah.
they use Excel as a source, right? You import your Excel file and then
Sadly, still,
you create
yes.
a model. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the normal. Then you have like these huge companies that have enterprise-wide models, and yes, what you're saying is absolutely true. But I would like to bet that most models are not that big and have like fields in the fact
Hmm.
tables that will never be hidden. You're using them. You're using them as keys. You're using them as, and it's just you have a sales table. Just use it for your measures. Why not? It will be a natural
Yeah,
place to go and find stuff.
I would agree. In a simple model, I think it translates very well to that. And the one thing that I actually saw Matt Allington do, I think a blog about a couple of years ago, and somebody I'm sure else has talked about it, but he actually puts there is nothing in the root folder in the sales table. So everything is either foldered to measures, and then there's a folder for columns. And I didn't even think, honestly, like up until I'd seen that, the only time I ever thought of a folder in Power BI is for measures. And like, yes, you can put hierarchies and other stuff, but it just never clicked of, oh, I guess you could also folder your columns into a separate folder. So you have the two top folders, and that for keeping it in the fact table, I liked that as a nice, like, clean interface for that. Um, there is one thing that I want to point out for people as like a hidden feature that I will link to the video from a couple years ago, but you can actually put your measures in 2 separate folders. One measure can go in 2 folders at the same time if you use a semicolon. Because there's times where, like, all right, sales variance, sales versus forecast. Should that go in a folder called sales? Should that go in a folder called variance or forecast? And if you have a person who would look in any of those three, let's say you have like a bunch of people doing this report as like a connected data set, you can use a semicolon to put that single measure across all three of them. So whatever folder you drag it from, it technically adds it from all three, but it's just the one measure. So I love the ability to actually multi-folder organize when you can't decide on where to put it.
Yes, yes, yes. It's cool. That's cool feature.
Yeah,
You can have also subfolders, and there's tons of cool ways to manage. One thing that would be lovely is to be able to do folders directly on the visual
I agree.
pane.
Like right click add to folder or something.
Yes.
They also, it's a pro con. They took away the ability to add hierarchies in the report pane. I get that. I will say that I've come across so many models with ghost and or unused hierarchies because somebody dragged and dropped, added a hierarchy, and they just left it there. That is, it's a very common pain point, but I do kind of miss it a little bit. I was so used to being able because I know how to do
What
it.
you do?
I did used to do it in the report pane when it was available there. So I've finally gotten used to go into the modeling view, but I do miss the really quickly and easily be able to do it in there rather than having to go to the other one, right click to create, then go to the manage menu, order them and everything. It does take a little bit more time. If I want to create a three column hierarchy, it will take slightly longer now to do it. Though the benefit now is people are not going to have a bunch of random hierarchies strewn across their model that they added by accident and forgot about.
Yeah. Something that is also very common is with Power Query. When you get an error and you click show me the error, and then it creates a folder on Power Query to show you just the lines that had errors. And I come across very, very often like models that have like 20, 30 error folders in there because they don't know that they can delete it. They don't know what it is, so they're afraid to delete it. So that's also, they should disappear. Once you get out of Power Query, just let them go.
Exactly. Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, a couple of people actually got excited about a few of the things we were talking about, just DAX folders and yeah, the hidden feature, just being able to create some of the measures. But I think as we're discussing the folders really did change a lot. And one person mentioned earlier, one of the downsides to a separate folder is that it broke the lineage for Q&A to be able to kind of trace and figure out where to use. That was fixed a year or two ago.
Yeah,
so the QA issue is now gone. I do think objectively at this point, it is entirely like a developer / end user subjective thing. I don't think there is any performance or feature limitations, regardless of where you keep the measure, as far as I'm aware now.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yep.
It's just a preference. I think that as developers, we should always ask our audience what they prefer, and if they don't care, do whatever you want. And then everybody's happy, right? So it's not my preference. It's just
exactly
whoever you're doing it for, they should be able to decide. And if they don't have any opinion, just go for it.
Yep.
Whatever rocks your world.
Exactly. And I will say that a lot of the extra effort for me comes from an early stage of, is this going to be something I'm going to build and it's just one report? Or is this going to become a connected data set that other reports are going to service and people will connect to? And at that point, then there's now it's not where I want the measures to be kept. Where will your users find the calculations, the fields, the descriptions the easiest? Another little, I wouldn't say best practice, but I think fun tip that I learned, and then I use Tabular Editor to do this, is I have a script that takes the measure, the code, and puts it into the description. So if you connect to a Power BI dataset, you can never see the code of the measure. You just can see the number it generates. But if you hover over it, you still get the tooltip of the description. So it is kind of nice to, really quickly click a button. All the measure code goes into the description. So if they want to see, what is this calculation doing, they can see the underlying code to at least understand it a bit. The one downside is it doesn't have any advanced formatting. So carriage returns, indents don't show up, don't work in the description. So even if you type it out that way, like the measure would be written in, with tabs and everything, it just still shows up as a single string. But it is better than potentially providing no information. And I found that I think people feel a bit more secure in trusting the data, being able to at least see, okay, it's calculating this with a filter for X, Y, and Z. Okay, I'm very clear on what this calculation is doing.
Actually, that's yes, yes, yes. Documentation is always very important, especially for
especially
wider audience. Yeah.
especially when you can auto document, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, that
Hmm.
is definitely that should be out of the box also. So
Uh,
many wishes.
yeah. There are a couple tool sets that are Data Visioner and Power BI Sentinel both kind of have a button that basically grabs all of the metadata in the code, DAX, fields, Power Query scripts, and just exports it into a PDF, which is pretty nice. I've used that more
Oh,
than once where a client's like, "Can you just document everything in the model? I'm going to export this for you, and here's the 35-page document. Like technically, this is everything that's in there. There's not if you want additional notes, I can write that, but at least the raw dump of everything for scripting, here you go. Here instantaneously, 60 seconds, and you're good to go.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, for
Uh,
documentation, I like to document for example, in Power Query, the steps. I just write if needed, obviously not everything, but if there's a step that it has to do with the business rule, I'll write it, I spell it out. The same in DAX. This calculates this, if this, and
yeah.
it's actually quite useful. And then I think when you export it with XML, you can actually can see XML. You can see the comments
Hmm.
on the, because you know you're seeing the actual code, so you can see the notes.
Yep.
It's actually very helpful.
I'm still waiting for the day for like lineage. We have it in Power Query Online. We're getting it eventually for Power Query desktop, but something kind of similar to that with DAX, where you could like run a measure and then it shows you like a graphical dependency tree of all of the other measures and all the tables and sources that it hits. I would just like, I'd love to be able to have that someday for DAX, just because I'm such a visual
Actually,
learner, and it's really nice just to be able to click through that, or and like in the Power Query, when you click at it, and it shows you the highlighted areas of everything that it connects to. So, uh, yeah, I find that very useful, and especially if you're coming into a workbook uh, that you haven't built, you have to click the measure. Okay, it goes to this measure. Literally, the only way to backtrack is you have to go one calculation at a time and trace it back, and you have to look at the code in every single one of them. And I mean, I don't know how, the worst ones you've had, but there's been times where to reverse engineer a measure, step one is always pop it into DAX formatter, so it organizes it a bit, but it's taken me a couple hours before to reverse engineer like a single measure because it was so nested, so many variables, and anything that would help to guide you on that, especially when you have to take over a workbook, which is a common scenario for developers, that would be, hopefully, fingers crossed, it's a feature that comes someday.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like an Excel, right? You click on everything and then you highlight and you see
Mm-hmm.
where everything comes from. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
definitely. I mean, when troubleshooting stuff, sometimes it's better just to ditch it and start all over, right? So to have a logic that
Yeah,
actually works for your head, and they like, yeah, yeah,
that's
it,
actually this might be another they just brought up I think a potential topic for another it depends scenario. Um, I've found, at least from my experience over the years, I will usually spend maybe an hour or two to take a look at a workbook or I'll say Power BI model, and I usually provide one or two recommendations. Now I will either basically clean this up and get it to what you need to be, or it's going to be more efficient for you to give me the business requirements, tell me where the data is, and I will start from scratch, and it will probably take me 30 to 40% less time because now I don't have to delete tables that are not used. There's like 20% of the measures in the model haven't been used today. All the reverse engineering to rip out everything that's not needed can take so much time. So I've found that quite often it is
mm,
easier to start from scratch because there
mm.
isn't the best tools to kind of map everything for you. You have to really do that manually. But what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. No, for me, this is the same. Also, I mean, it depends how big the job actually is. So it depends. We go there again. But
Yeah, of
no,
course.
seriously, it often is better to start from scratch because you will apply the best practices to
Hmm.
that specific scenario that you're in. Because the whole conversation of today of it depends is basically that who is going to, for example, if I am dealing with business users only, I will never do a DAX calculation that they will never be able to maintain. So if I have to, I create a calculator column
Yeah.
and I leave it as a calculator column so they can maintain it, right? Because the idea is not that I will support it, the idea is that they will support the model. There's no idea for me to be there, you know, hand holding everything. So he said it's better if we do it this way, and then I redo everything, and then in a way that I know they will be able to work with it afterwards. It makes more sense.
I
But
completely
obviously,
agree.
sometimes you get this gigantic model that you don't know where to start, and that's a lot.
It's
That's a
it's all
lot more difficult.
it's painful sometimes to go through it too. And then you're like, oh yeah, so this was built by an offshore developer. They did not document it. They're not available for questions. But we need you to clean it up. Like, all right, you know, we're starting that's going out the window. We're starting from scratch. But I like your comment on um, I need to build out the report to the model, to the person that I'm handing it off to. And sometimes that means that you know the most effective way to write something, but that might not be the most easily understood. So you need to do it in a few more steps. And I actually have a great DAX example of this, of an if function that can be written very short or a bit longer, but it's also a lot more clear. So just to give people an example, I think of a time where you
Cool. Yes,
sometimes
please.
want to add some more code or more steps for somebody who's maybe not as skilled in something. So let me. This part is always having to handle the control center and my stuff here. All right, so we're going to merge right over to this. Here we go. Okay, so example. Yeah, so I will describe to you essentially the statement. It's basically if it's an if statement where if something exists, do a calculation, otherwise return blank. The most optimized form that I can do for this would be, so if sales exists, let's just say sales times 1.1, otherwise blank. That is, if sales is not blank, do sales times 1.1, otherwise return blank as alternative result. That is the shortest way to possibly write that, but somebody who's not familiar with DAX might not understand that versus, this doesn't, it's more of the example of the syntax. That is the exact same code. That is the same performance. The same thing should be ran even in DAX Studio, but that's a lot easier to read. So there are times where if I know I'm handing this to somebody less skilled, I'll either A, walk them through how to write it more optimally, or I will just write it this way because this is very clear now. Here's the condition, and that I've explicitly stated both alternative results. It automatically will return blank if you don't do that, but so those are a situation where yes, it's more lines of code, and for myself, I wouldn't write it this way, but I want to make sure that it's clear to the person I'm writing it to. So just because it's the most optimized, to your perspective, does not necessarily mean that will be the best delivery to hand off to somebody who will be managing this model. So you have to keep those considerations in mind. Go back to us. It's similar like in Power Query. I like to keep as few steps as possible. So there are times where I will usually edit the code a little bit to make one applied step rather than the three, but then you're starting to touch the M code, and for somebody who's not familiar with Power Query, if it still runs fast, I might want to have actually 2 or 3 distinct explicit steps with the gear icon to edit, just because that is going to be easier for them to manage. So those are the things that I'm very careful about, and I will usually have a conversation with whoever the owner is, and I want to get a very thorough understanding of how competent are they using all this stuff that I'm building, so I don't actually I give them something where they have to constantly ping me because they don't understand the model, or how to fix or upgrade something that I've implemented.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree with you. I think with Power Query, I'm a huge fan of nesting functions.
Yes.
So this step does just this thing instead of doing it before. And I'm so guilty of that, and it just sits now. So I have to be very, very careful not to nest everything. I don't know why I do it, but
Exactly.
it's just clarity. At the end, it's actually clarity on the steps, because you can say easily this step does this, but for maintenance purposes, obviously, not the best if people don't know that. Yeah, like you said. So yeah, you always have to be very careful and mindful as to who are you doing what for,
Mm-hmm. And there's
and
a
that's why
couple
the
of
best practices is yeah. Go
exactly.
go.
No, I was just gonna. There's a couple of just good examples in the chat about you know making sure to row out multiple steps, and then as well just adding comments. Again, just as a quick mention for people, if you don't use it already, daxformatter.com or the DAX formatter built into DAX Studio. Uh, there's definitely times where I approximately formatted a bit, but I'll still just copy and paste it into there once I've written like 40 lines of DAX code and use that. It's a really quick and easy way to I'd say it documents in a way because the indents and everything else provide information on the queries and subqueries, so it does give you context of how the measure is written, but with zero effort from your part other than having it copied into a browser.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, with DAX formatting, one thing that I'm not so happy about is that it indents everything very, like, it just expands everything a lot. You know, you get like a
True.
very, very long, and you know, the space and the DAX formula editor is like not the best. So I prefer to just format
Yep.
myself. It took me a while actually to learn because, you know, I come from the business world, so like what format what I didn't know, but now I'm getting better. And but I still like to group the parts of the DAX. So when I do DAX formatter, it just booms, it blows everything up, right? And makes
Oh,
it
that
a bit
just
too long for my taste.
and I think on DAX 2, DAX formatter, and how to write the DAX code, I think it wasn't on my list, but it's a best practice that I actually I'm a little happy that I was able to talk to Daniel and get this implemented into DAX Studio, though I know Alberto and Marco don't like. They do not like to start a line with commas. They like to end their lines with commas. But at least from a development perspective, if any new lines start with a comma, you can really quickly just comment it, and then the measure doesn't break. If it goes it to the end of it, then you have to do a bit of tweaking to quickly comment out sections to test your code.
Good.
Uh, but in DAX Studio, you now have a toggle when it formats it to do leading or trailing commas on any things that require uh, you to use those to separate parts of the logic. Their thing is still this is good for development, but then you should still switch it over to having the comma at the end of the line once you actually publish it. But uh, I've started to honestly do it more where most of the code that I write, I usually will start my new lines with a comma separator just
Mm.
because I just find it so easy to comment out. But do you have a preference for one of the two?
Yeah, no, I just I I have a very weird way to do DAX. That's the thing. My brain works like weird with DAX. I just think about the tables that I need to do calculations on, and then
Okay.
so I group. This is the table that I need, and this is the step. This is going to filter something. I put it in the next line, and then so I have a method that is probably not the best, but it just makes that I can read the code very easily and I can troubleshoot
Mm.
it. I can, okay, get rid of this
Yep.
table, get rid of this filter. Exactly what you're saying. It's like, okay, I want this line out. And it's very easy
Hmm.
to just grab it and pick it out instead of if it is everything indented, it's like
Exactly.
hard to work with. So yeah, but it's just personal preferences. I mean, anything that is formatted is good. If it is just one thick line, it's like it's harder to read. But with text formatter, I mean, we can always, or you can always format it yourself, indent it yourself if you need it. So
Yep.
yeah,
And
I
I, I
think
do
it's a
think,
need.
and to your comment as well, just on being able to for the readability and everything else, like variables are a great way to do that. Like
Yeah,
it's probably like 50-50. Like variables certainly for performance and caching, but so much of the time that I use that, it's also just for readability. Like especially if you have an if statement
yeah.
of this and that, blob of code, blob of code for
Oh
your
yeah.
condition A and B, and then just simply if name A, name B, and it just makes it really easy, really readable. And then I think the trick that it was SQL BI, but you have a variable called result, and then you return the result that way. If you ever need to test it, you just swap out the variable name at the end from any of your initial variables or your result variable, and that makes testing like a breeze. And I pretty much now
Super
do that
cool.
on
Yeah.
any advanced anything that uses variables. It always has a result variable before the return, just because coming back in 6 months having to test and debug something that just makes it so much simpler.
Mm, 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 mm. I
Yeah.
think variables make writing DAX so much easier, so much easier. I don't know how we wrote DAX without variables. To be fair, it is just night and day.
I remember, but that was back in the day. Like that was Excel 2016 came out with variables. Excel 2013 did not have Power Pivot for Excel 2013 did not have variables, and if statements became faster, and it's once that muscle grew, it's just like, oh my god, you could never go back to anything from that. It was also like, do you remember in Power Pivot, if you rename this, because nowadays if you rename a measure, the metadata for everything gets updated. All of the measures
Yeah.
that are dependent on it get updated. That used to not be the case. If you renamed a measure in Power Pivot in like 2013, and that was pointing to like 35 other calculations, you had to go and rename those other 35 calculations because it wouldn't recognize it anymore. It would blow up your model. So once you named it, don't ever change your name. You have to make sure that
Yeah.
that is the name that you want it to be, because it would just be the most painfully slow thing in the world to have to go and update like the all the other dependencies from it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember when I was a beginner, I was using implicit measures all the time. What did I know? So I was
Hmm.
using it everywhere in all my calculations. I have like, I don't know, 30 time series calculations, implicit measures. Went to the source, changed the name, and the brr, everything broke. And I had to change all of them, all of them one by one. It's like, oh,
I've had that. Yeah,
and
it was painful.
hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But one thing that I really, really like that I've done recently with calculate, right? So before you have to explicitly say filter table. For example, if you want to have where president is Obama, right? So you have to write filter president table equal Obama. Now you can just write president equal Obama.
Oh,
You don't have to explicitly write the filter.
yes.
It's
That was a
brilliant.
recent optimization that they did in the last 4 months. They
Yeah, yeah.
they've changed how the filtering in Calculate works, and I think you need to use the explicit filter function even less than you used to. That
Yeah, yeah,
also,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would say that that is probably a one of the common pitfalls that I see people do initially. I did it myself, 9 years ago. Is I would think that every filter has to have the filter function because I'm like, well, yeah, if you're going to filter, you should use filter. Like, it's kind of just, but it's only for in a digression. I won't get into too much, but it's essentially it's advanced filtering when you're comparing against a measure or other things where it's not just year equals 2017 product category equals spikes. It's advanced complex filtering usually is when you require that, but I feel like that is one of the more common pitfalls that I see in measure routing of models is everybody's just using filter functions everywhere. It does
Yeah.
optimize for that now. I believe it used to actually run it and it would be more expensive, but it can detect the type of filter and it will know if the filter function is needed and it basically automatically removes it from the query when it runs now, which is really nice. So like there's auto optimization that's happening in the back end. I think same with SumX. I think if you're doing a SumX on something, that does not require the X function to iterate over like every row. I think it just runs the base measure or whatever calculation that's
Oh,
doing as well.
cool.
Yeah.
Didn't know.
But there's a few of
Very,
those
very
where
cool.
it's still written wrong, but at least it runs optimized in the backend because they're now accounting for I wouldn't say user error, but users who don't necessarily know the truest path to write something. Speaking of Excel, though, I did actually have a question for Matthias that I wanted to bring up. And I'll let you answer this one. First is so for Excel users, is analyze in Excel via Power Pivot still best practice, or should we promote cube formulas more? Probably maybe in relation to like Chris Webb did a lot of cube stuff on one of my live streams the other week.
Oh, I don't use cube formula, so I let you answer that. I wouldn't know what
I
to
will say
advise.
they're technically the same thing. If you download a workbook that is analyzed in Excel, the cube function, the cube formula is using the same connection as the pivot table is. The only difference is the pivot table is running queries in the shape of of the table, but you look at the code of the backend of a pivot table, it's basically still running the same cube formula MDX functions against the live connection versus you just go into a cell and editing it. So they're kind of one and the same. It more depends on what you're looking for. Cube formulas are really great when you're wanting to build a custom dashboard around a pivot table where you want like a single value card or maybe a list or other kind of elements that aren't quite in a table shape. That's usually how I build out or I used to build out a dashboard in Excel is it would be a mixture of tables, charts, and then some cube formulas for some cards and other little visuals that I would scatter in cells across the page with it.
Cool. Yeah, no, no, no. I don't use MDX, so I
No
wouldn't know what to
worries.
say. But normally, analyzing Excel is for business users that
Yeah.
probably won't know cube either way. So I guess it is a way to make the model or the data set accessible to the business people to be able to do analysis. That would be my guess.
It's ad hoc reporting. But yeah, like it was a really fun stream with Chris that he did where he basically it was just everything on related to how Excel connects to Power BI, showing the new ribbons, a lot of the connected data sets. But yeah, it's kind of the phrase, Excel was old but is new again, and I think with the additional connections of that and one of my favorite features to come out for this is you can connect, uh, analyze an Excel file, but when you publish that to the web in a workspace in Power BI, that connection still now works. Because before, if you published anything that was connected to a Power BI data set, you try to click a slicer and it couldn't access the underlying data. So like, all right, well, I can have it on desktop, but if I can't have the best of both worlds. So I think that was the final component in the puzzle piece to really integrate Excel with Power BI. The last thing that I'm hoping comes at some point is that workbook that has to be on a separate page in your workspace in Power BI. Make a visual in Power BI where you can just kind of like a Power App. I want a page where I can have like Excel online, on a report page in Power BI with a bunch of other stuff. Not directly in a Power BI report. There is no Excel inside of it. You can have a dashboard where you can pin an Excel workbook with like Power BI elements, but it can't be on an actual report page.
In a Power BI app, you can embed Excel now.
Well, in an app. But not on like a single PBIX report page with buttons and other stuff like that.
No, not inside. No,
yes.
not inside Power BI.
Yeah.
No.
That's the very last one that I'm hoping comes at some point is, it's kind of like a Power App where buttons and slicers can interact with the Power App, and then the Power App goes back to that. I'm hoping an Excel online kind of custom visual will eventually come out similarly to that, where you could have like a page where you could do, fancy Excel stuff if you wanted to.
Yeah, something that is really needed in Excel is the connect to the data flow.
Yep.
That would be so useful. Oh my gosh. Like, it's so useful.
Oh, I didn't even realize that hadn't actually come out yet. I do know there's always more Power Query stuff in Power BI online, so you can connect to Power BI datasets, but you can't connect to data flows yet in Excel. Okay.
No, unfortunately not. Yeah.
So the only way to really get the data flow data is it has to go to a Power BI dataset first, then it can go to Excel. Okay.
Yeah, and that's not very useful. So
Fair.
Hopefully it will be available soon, because it really will help a lot of business users just to be able to, create some models, grab some data. And, there's a lot of small medium companies that do not have an IT department with data analysts. So they are the data analyst, and, the data flows are very useful to have like the streams of customer data or product data instead of having on an Excel. Even if Excel is the actual source at the bottom, more people will be able to access it. So it will be so useful to have it. So hopefully soon.
Well, with anything Office, it's always a matter of, it's usually a matter of when, not if. It just, things trickle a bit slower sometimes with the with the updates for that. I am looking through some of the best practices. I want to do one that you're excited about too. So I'll run through a couple and tell me maybe the one that would stand out for you. So bidirectional relationships. In a visual, aggregations should only be measures, not never the original column. That would be number 2, and then custom visuals and whether or not you should use them or not. What of those 3 would you think would be a good one?
Yeah, we can talk about custom visuals because with charting layer, I'm working with custom visuals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my god, the problem with custom visuals is that you install it, right, and you use it, and then you don't know if there is an update or not. In order to get the update, you have to actually go through the store and, for example, with WordPress, you probably have a WordPress site that it tells you like, hey, there's an update, go and grab this plugin. So Power BI should either download it automatically, maybe not, because it might break, or just tell you that there is an update, go and grab it. Because otherwise you just don't know when new things happen. So that is my biggest complaint, I think, that you have all the time to go and re-download everything in order to get the latest features, if any.
Yep. And they can be a lot more hit or miss, for sure. I think there are a lot of subjective reasons to not use custom visuals. I think there is one objective one, too, probably, that come to mind as like pretty concrete considerations, at least, to have for them. Number 1 is they will always load just a little bit slower because they're sandboxed. For context for people listening in, when you load a report page, the web browser is like single-threaded, and basically it just loads the objects. It doesn't matter how big your model is, how fast your measures are. Time is required to render the shapes, the visuals, the slices, everything onto the page. And the more visuals you have, the slower it gets. The nice thing is there's an optimization across native visuals. They can share libraries between each other for certain shared elements in the visual. They can kind of like load some of the code library for that, and then like maybe title, and it can help share that code across a few of them as it's loading, so it kind of caches it in a way, almost like a variable. Custom visuals don't have access to that for security reasons. They can't grab anything from other visuals that I've loaded because they don't want to do any data leaks. So Microsoft has built it to be very secure, but because of that, and they have to load completely independently, they just take a little bit more time to load. A couple of years ago, there was a big overhaul on that library, so they are much faster than they used to be. But even if, let's say 100% is the mark you're aiming for, they still might only be 85 to 90% of that speed. So just be careful on, don't build a report with every single visual on your page as a custom visual. You're probably going to start adding some lag to your report page. But if you have like a handful of them on it, that's totally fine. But that's one consideration. And then the other one is just, if you're not getting it from the store, or you're doing one that's built from a shop, just make sure that it's from a safe location, and it's a trusted source that it's been built from. Anything in the App Store, Microsoft does test for security. That doesn't mean the custom visual is good quality. It doesn't mean it performs well or it's a great visual by any regard, but it's a safe visual if it's in the store. It has been tested for security and data leaks, not for optimization.
But they can send data out, right? I mean, only the certified visuals do not send data out. Some of the non-certified can actually
correct.
Right?
The certified do, but they've at least vetted it in the sense that it's like it doesn't put any ones that are in the store, to my understanding, still don't pose any security threat. There's just the certified visuals are extra secure because it's not sending in any information out. But if it does, it has to explicitly say that in the terms or the description of what data is being sent out and why for that. Like, I don't have a custom visual, but as an example, like my app source report has a check to see if people have a subscription for determining what the refresh window is. So it explicitly states that the one variable that is sent to a data Power Automate or a flow is the email that you provide, and the one parameter, that's the one piece of information that's sent out. But it also, I had to clearly define that in the terms and conditions for Microsoft to approve that. So, both are safe. It's just the level of security that either provides.
Yeah. But I mean, depending on the visual that you use, it actually, depending on the service, for example, this natural language visual, natural narratives, I don't remember what it's called. It actually goes and creates a narrative, a text of whatever you have in your canvas, like the smart, how is it called? Smart narratives visual, the AI visual. And for that thing to work, it has to get your data. How otherwise are they going to build anything? So it gets all the data, gets to their servers, and then take it back, right? So you're actually exporting all your data out. You need to be careful with that. Because depending on what your data is, that might get you in trouble, especially with the laws in Europe, for example, GDPR, if you have like emails or personal. You have to be very, very careful as to what you're using.
Oh, I agree. I mean, even like I've had tricky situations, just as a quick tangent, in Germany where the usage metrics report, which is fine in the US, but that has users and login times, and that is not information in Germany that you're allowed to aggregate to the individual level. You can summarize it up to like a trend and pattern for like the org, but you cannot know that Steve or Maria logged in and out at certain times, because then you can trace it to when they were at work and all that other stuff. But I agreed, exactly. There's so much information that with custom visuals, it's just a consideration to have. Somebody did point out in the chat that like I think they're still using standard visualizations. Just to give a couple of, I think, good examples of why you might want to use custom visuals, like the bullet chart. It's probably the most common custom visual that I use as a type of chart. I would love Power BI to have a native visual version of that, but it's just for comparing actuals to targets, it is a really useful visualization. And there's a lot of good ones in free and paid in the App Store and otherwise. But I think that's, that and among, I'm sure, dozens of other visualizations are great examples of when native visuals don't cut it, you need something that represents the data better that's just not available. Or the HTML viewer that you've talked about, the icon map. There are so many different things that drastically add to your tool set if you're willing to explore custom visualizations.
I think if they would integrate Charticulator into Power BI, we would be
Yeah.
able to create absolutely anything. Like seriously, anything. I've been trying whatever I came across on Twitter, been trying to reproduce it, and everything is possible. Obviously, there are a little bit bugs here and there. They're
Hmm.
still in beta, so they still have to tweak it a little bit, but that thing in Power BI is a killer. It's a killer. So maybe you
I
can
agree.
show them if you go to ideaspowerbi.com. There's an idea for getting Charticulator into Power BI. Please vote. Don't
It.
leave today's
I mean,
without voting.
it's already in preview. Are you just referring to it coming out of preview?
No, I want it integrated in Power BI out of the box. Like when you launch Power BI, the
Oh yeah,
Charticulator should be there.
I think it's going to be there eventually because right now it's in preview. You have to go to the App Store to download it. My understanding was once it's out of preview, though, it's similar to ArcGIS and other stuff. It's just going to be built right into the native one.
Well, according to the developer, they need votes.
Oh, do
So
they? Okay. Well,
please
that's
go
good
and
to
vote.
know.
Yeah. So if you go to, again, ideaspowerbi.com, there's an idea for integrating Charticulator into Power BI, and it will
Found
be
it.
absolutely fantastic if you vote and if we get that thing in there, because we could do
How does
anything.
this only have 278 votes? This needs to have more.
Exactly.
All right. I right now
Exactly.
I see 33 people in this chat. I expect that to be above 300 if you only if you agree
Come
with me,
on.
um, or agree with us. But
Even if not, come on.
yes, like
Do
help
it for
vote
the
that
team.
up. Give a couple of dozen more votes to this thing, if you haven't already. But yeah, Charticulator is amazing. The one thing that I hope, kind of in line with like the DAX templates that Didier just showcased recently, Charticulator, if they can integrate the templates directly into it, where you can just click the button from inside of Power BI and it builds it for you. You can customize it, or it's just ready to go. I think that will make it even more powerful too. Is just have that community template, but that is with the ability to apply it with a couple of clicks just directly inside of Power BI.
Yeah. Something that I realized with templates is that, because I've built so many Charticulators now, that it is a bit hard to know where to put stuff into the
Mm-hmm.
fields if you haven't built it yourself. So, but not sure exactly how easy it will be to use the templates. I'm not sure. We'll see. But I haven't been able to successfully use a template yet. Like knowing where do I put the stuff. Like it's not really working the way I like. But the thing is that Charticulator has a. I thought the Charticulator was going to be like DAX, right? Like it's going to take forever for me to learn, but it's not like that. It's like it takes a little bit to learn, and then
Yeah,
once it clicks, you got it. Like seriously, it's not because with DAX you fight it, you fight it, and you fight it, and you
yeah,
fight it. This you'll get, and you get it probably once you build like 15 charts. It's just
Mhm.
that's what it takes, and then you can just start really tweaking it and doing absolutely anything you want, and the freedom
Yeah.
it gives you of creativity is so good, so
I
good.
agree. It's nothing is quite as like magically clicky draggy droppy as Power Query, but it's darn close. And I mean, you give yourself like just a couple of build cases with it, and yeah, you pick it up pretty quick compared to DAX, which can honestly take months if not years to like get expert level. You can
Yes.
get as far as you need with most of the stuff in Charticulator pretty easily. I've
Yeah.
deployed 3 or 4 visuals where there's just a couple of times where a client's like, hey, we have this idea. We want like this, but with a bar and this thing. Like, you know what? That a couple of years ago, that probably would have cost $2,000 to $3,000 to have a shop build this for us. I can probably do that in like 2 hours, and tweak it. The one downside with any bespoke thing is sometimes the data labels or other stuff aren't quite perfect depending on size of the bars and all that. But it's a pro con. Anytime you start to highly customize something, you lose a lot of those features that come out of a native visual that was built by a team of 10 people over the course of 12 months.
Yeah. No, I find Charticulator to be a lot
Hmm.
more customizable than the custom visuals in Power BI.
Hmm.
There's a huge lack of features in the visuals that they are on out of the box. So things that were impossible in Power BI, you can do Charticulator in like seconds. But
Exactly. Yeah.
they are still developing, right? So legends they don't align the way you want, but it's a small but very responsive team. So they are developing like super agile. So hopefully very soon we can just, I mean, Tableau people, watch out. We're coming for you for
Yep.
sure.
Oh, and like, well, little bit to that, a small plug, but I mentioned it a couple of times in some other videos. The one thing that I've seen that's come out recently, and I've been working with Gopal, who owns XViz and InfoRiver. InfoRiver is probably the first time that I've seen something come out that can do a lot of like row level visuals that can compete with ClickView, um, Tableau, Spotfire, and a lot of those other ones where you can have like the integrated spark lines and all this other stuff. So I'm just glad to see custom visuals start to come out that can provide one less reason where like, oh, well, we want to switch, but we can't switch because of X, Y, and Z. And I think there's kind of an ebb and flow. Usually, Power BI has its core set of native features. Then there's some amount of custom visuals that are out there to help fill the gap between those. And eventually, Microsoft looks at those trends and potentially creates their own and integrates it, or sometimes even just buys the company. But I think the open source marketplace for that allows for people to help fill gaps or holes in a ship, especially for individuals that are trying to cross between platforms where certain things have more features, or in terms of Tableau, I mean, it's built from the ground up to be a bespoke visual creator. You can customize every little piece of those, and Charticulator is helping to solve a lot of that for people who
Definitely,
who have
definitely.
the sponsors who are used to being able to request a change to every single little element and have it pixel perfect, where you can get most of the way with a lot of stuff in Power BI, but there's still going to be some of those gaps where like, well, that technically can't be configured because there's no option to add a measure formatter or something into that, a conditional formatting, or today.
Mm-mm-mm. Yeah, I saw an image of the Economist. They had an arrow chart. It was the first time I saw it. So they're like, oh, cool. I'm going to recreate it in Charting later. So I did. Didn't take a long time. It was like maybe, I don't know, 30 minutes, an hour.
Yep.
And then I posted it on Twitter back, and then somebody said like, "Oh, they use Adobe Illustrator to do that." I'm like, "Oh my god, can you imagine?" It's like images for charts. Like they have to start using chart.
Mm-hmm.
Charticleer is not just for Power BI; it's a web tool. Like they
Yep.
should use it, and they can then post the HTML on the website and then show it there. Like, why would you do that on Adobe Illustrator? It makes no sense. So cool. This is going to be huge. I'm sure of it. It's just so good and so flexible.
Exactly. I mean, it just the approachability, and I think the learning curve is just so substantially reduced. Yeah, and I'm still having to barely crack the surface of it. But like you said, I think honestly I get inspired a lot where I come across something else on the web. I'm like, oh, that looks cool. Let's see if I can build this in Power BI. Yeah,
Exactly.
like I
Yeah.
I don't always come up with the cool visuals myself. Probably honestly not even that often am I completely inspired without external inspiration. But I do like to try to recreate something from another system using the tools given in Power BI, and it's kind of like a fun way to you see a picture of a car and like, all right, how can I assemble this myself given the tools in my garage?
Exactly. And you can actually do everything from Power Query that helps you do the data to the modeling, and then if you need some DAX, you do some DAX, and then finally the last piece of the puzzle that was missing is like, how do I put this awesome visualization without having to do anything, custom basis or whatever? How do I do that? And then you can now do everything within Power BI, which is really amazing. And then you publish it to the
Yep,
service, schedule a refresh, and done. Who can do that?
exactly.
Seriously, it's just really, really good.
I want to mention one other thing on custom visuals, and then there were a couple comments about explicit and implicit measures that I think would be another fun topic to discuss. But
For sure.
talking to Daniel, the DanUp custom visual, which at the moment is just downloadable from GitHub, he is hopefully going to have it published soon in App Stores. There's a bunch of red tape you got to jump through to get that, but it should be available hopefully sometime in the next couple of months, where it actually will be available just as just like the Charticulator one. It'll be built right into that, which should also help adoption and make it seem a lot safer for people who don't know who he is but have heard of the tool. So I'm excited to see that as a not only one but two different bespoke visual creators directly inside of Power
Yeah,
BI
yeah,
coming from the App Store store. Uh,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I, um, yeah, Matthias was making a funny comment on the Info River is a better paginated report generator. Yeah, I, I love the paginated reports are necessary and needed. The paginated report builder does a job, but it is there's no like subjectiveness to it. It's built off of a almost 20-year-old platform, and it requires a lot of code. There's clicky clicky draggy droppy does not really exist to a large extent inside of the report builder. So I love it. I've built with it. It just takes a lot of time and effort. So any tool, regardless of what it is, that lets me quickly and easily build that, I'm usually game for that because I don't like building paginated reports, but I do because they are necessary for a lot of people who have that. So, you know, maybe someday if they completely overhaul the report builder, that might be great because it was built off of SSRS and it requires you to learn an entirely separate code language.
Yeah, so maybe one time they won't be needed. I mean, the only reason you need a paginated report is just because it prints out an
Printing,
entire table,
you
right?
need to print.
That's all.
Yep. Exactly.
So
Like that is the only reason to ever need it is printing. But that's not going to go away for a long time, probably.
yeah, no,
Uh,
but maybe there should be other solutions rather than creating a paginated report. Like,
Sometimes,
if you,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, sometimes that's actually a conversation to have with the users because I mean, I've had a lot of people hire like, oh yeah, we'd like you to build printable reports. Question number one, why? Why do you need a printed report? Well, we like send these out every month to all of our okay. Well, why do you send people out a PDF every month? Well, they're not like you keep digging into it. Oh well, they're not really comfortable with using technology and this and that. Like well, so and honestly, I'll show them some examples of like here's what a clean simple report is. And look, you can now click and you can filter. This one report can show you 85 different cuts of the data rather than having 120 pages they have to like flip through. Or maybe you record like a 60-second tutorial video that's in the app where they can watch an instruction on how to use it. There's many ways to, I think, guide users away from it. Sometimes it's necessary. If you have field people who are out and deployed and they, for some reason, actually need physical copies of stuff, absolutely. But it's kind of like live connections. Do you need real-time data or do you think you need real-time data? Do you need a paginated
exactly.
report
Yeah.
or do you think you need a paginated report? They both serve their purposes, but client education, I think, is a big part of being a good developer when you are working with clients and figuring out what actually needs to be delivered.
Yeah. But also now with analyze in Excel, if you just dump the data in Excel, you can print it from there, right? So I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
you can create like a pretty Excel
Yep.
report and then you can print it and then so I think paginated reports should disappear. I don't see a future for them, hopefully.
I am like, so we are at 10:13. I can keep going for a bit as for a few more discussions. Is there a hard cutoff for you, just so I make sure I don't push you past anything?
I'm fine.
Okay, perfect. So
We can
I
do
do
it, yeah.
think another fun. We can maybe do a couple more depend scenarios. The implicit versus explicit measures. I have an example that I can show so people get a little bit of context for this. So let me. I need to transition over to my screen. There we go. Okay, perfect. So, uh, explicit measures. That's basically like that would be you just using measures from a folder. And and I used to trumpet like you should never ever use a naked column, a raw column, whatever you want to call it. Just use measures. Those are the only things that should ever go into the values well or the aggregation. Basically, the relational modeling best practices in a perfect world is your fact table contains data that has a measure that goes here. Your dimension tables provide your classifications. However, there are, it depends scenario. I think an implicit measure can have use cases sometimes. If you have a visual or a table where the end user would benefit from being able to change the aggregation type, and it has to be clean, simple data for this, but sales amount as an example. I have the option, and so does the end user when I publish this. They can change it from a sum, they can change it to the average, they can change it to a min or a max, so they can slice and dice the data around. I don't have to make a disconnected table with a measure with a switch statement to do this. It's technically possible with a measure, but that's a lot of extra work. If I simply just use my sales amount column in here, I'm given the options for all of these extra calculations that I can do. So if that's something that is valuable as a deliverable for an interactive experience, there are, yeah, I would say it's the exception to the rule because this is not a common scenario. but for the times where this could be beneficial, that's when I would actually just use the column for those opportunities. What are your thoughts?
I mean, implicit versus explicit.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, as I mentioned in the beginning, I was using implicit measures all the time, and it just came out and bite me. So I don't use them anymore. But as a business user, I understand that if you don't know that you need to create a measure, you'll do it. But then the model will tell you, because once you change the column and it breaks all your measures everywhere, then you'll realize why you need to do explicit measures instead of implicit. But
Yep.
I learned that the hard way.
Back in the day too, with Excel, the one annoying thing that Power Pivot would do is if you added a column, an implicit measure, if you dropped that into any of the wells, it would actually create and add the measure in the model for you. Like what I just did, technically there is a measure for sum of sales amount that's hidden. It's not visible. But if you had a sales table in Power Pivot, I dragged and dropped the sales amount column, it would actually add a measure called sum of sales that is now permanently in my sales table. So it will generate a new measure for every column that you drag into a well. So you couldn't turn that off. So I found that kind of extra annoying. Is now I have my total sales amount or anything else, but I have all of these auto-generated measures that are not only in the model, but they're visible. And you know, so that part
you couldn't hide before, right?
You might have been able to hide them, but it's still like it's clutter. You know, I knew they were there, and it would bug me that they were in that. Technically, the exact same thing is happening in Power BI. When I put that measure into there, it is creating a measure in the hidden measures table that's probably called sum of sales amount or whatever aggregation I'm doing. But like that is the one exception. It's just kind of like personalized visuals that exist today now for changing the visual type. Sometimes it does benefit the business user in a report to be able to change the aggregation type for very clean and simple data. Like you're not going to probably want to do that over like a sum of x function or anything else that's complicated. But if you just have a really clean and simple fact table with like order amount on there, being able to see average order, min order, or anything else can certainly be useful. But that's, if I was to actually put a number to it, like how often I implement that, it's probably 5% less of the models that I use do I deploy that. But it's at least nice as an option for the art of possible when talking to your users about what features they might have. Because it's good to have flexibility in the type of data that you show without having to add all these different measures for your average, min, max, sum, and everything else, and then a switch statement to like have a disconnected slicer to toggle with that, which is so much extra work.
Yeah. That you said now, it reminded me of, I use actually implicit measures a lot for troubleshooting. So when I'm counting things to see if everything came across, or I'm doing the sum or the max or whatever it is, I just use implicit measures because you can easily change, as you said, the aggregation type.
Yep.
And then you can see, you put country, and then to see if you have all the countries, you put country again, and then change it to count, which is sum, and it's so useful, you know. Then I get rid of it. But just for troubleshooting quickly, it's super useful.
I do it for counts a lot. Like very often, if I wanted to quickly get like a distinct kind of customer or something else, like I'm not going to have probably a measure in a model to do that. But that is actually the one side of tabular editor and calculation groups. Once you add a calculation group, implicit measures are turned off. You can't actually add it to the well. If you do, there's no option anymore to have a drop down where you can select the aggregation type. That actually and they call it's a feature, not a bug, as it's described. I'm more of the line that I think that should still be enabled, because as a developer, it's really nice to be able to add a column temporarily to aggregate it. And now every time I do that, I have to right click, new measure, type out the measure, and then when I'm done, I have to delete that measure. And that's a bit painful, especially on a larger model where the metadata to refresh to create a measure might take 15 or 20 seconds. So flip side is, sure, I can open tabular editor, but then I have to wait for tabular editor to open. And so that's the one downside for me of calculation groups now. Creating them is it takes away a feature that as a developer is very useful.
Yeah. No, I use it all the time too. It's very, very handy. And I use also my business users, so they know that you can actually do the same very quickly without knowing any docs.
Yeah.
Just right click, and then you can see how many blanks I have. Right click and count. And so it's useful. Yeah. But then when you're creating the final model, then you shouldn't use implicit measures if possible.
Exactly. They other than that, basically, I would say that one one rule of changing the aggregation type of the end user, there is no other reason really to use them in the final well outside of development and quick and easy
Yeah.
testing.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you also just, like with hiding columns and everything else, you make sure to enforce that the right fields from the right tables are being used, like making sure you use the date field from the calendar table, not the fact table, and all those. So it's like you want to almost put guide rails on enforcing that if they're looking for a field, there is only one field that they have a choice to use. If your
Exactly. Yeah.
sales amount column is unhidden, oh, I have like total sales, but I have my sales amount. Which am I supposed to drag into this well? In Analyze in Excel doesn't allow implicit yet, but apparently that's actually coming. Chris Webb mentioned that. So right now, today, Analyze in Excel, you can only use measures. You're not allowed to aggregate a column. That will eventually come out. So they're actually adding an implicit measure feature to the Analyze in Excel environment. I'm not sure when, but I'm assuming sometime in the near future.
Yeah, yeah, and I really, really hope they do, because sometimes you just want to do analyze in Excel like very quickly for whatever, for troubleshooting, and you don't necessarily want to add a measure for that, and you cannot do any calculations of any type because you need a measure for it, and it's a bit frustrating actually. So hopefully
I agree.
they'll do it soon.
One last little tool in the belt to fix, right? And that I think that will add a lot of it'll make the development a lot easier for sure.
Mm. Mm-mm.
I'm just looking at some of the comments to see if there's any questions. Let's do like one or two more. It depends scenarios. I'm checking some of the notes that I have. Let's see. And some of the ones that we collectively talked about. We've already talked about a bit of minimizing power query transformations, reducing the number of calculating columns, reducing calculated columns that use related. Actually, I think this might be a good one unless you had any other ideas. Dates are always fun ones. Removing auto date or like splitting date and time. Yeah.
Depends. It definitely depends. Which is so weird that I say it, because I hate it. I hate it with passion. Every time I see a model with it, it just
Oh, the auto date time. Yeah.
oh yeah, 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 yeah. But if you are a business user and you don't know that you need a calendar, you can still work, right? It will work, because before that was implemented, you couldn't do anything. You try these time intelligence things and nothing would work, and then you would say, okay, what's the problem? So now you can do. If you don't know a lot, it will help you. But if you are a developer, it's a nightmare. It's a huge nightmare. And then when they started building, the calculations, they started using the hierarchy dates, and then they have this dot whatever. They're like, oh my god! And then what date did they pick from which table? Because there are dates everywhere.
Oh yeah. I mean, I completely agree. I think as I tell anybody developing, if they start to hit a paralysis of like, well, we can't deploy it yet. It's not perfect. No, like step one, if you have a set of requirements at a deadline, does the report work, and is the data right? Like if both of those are met, that can be a phase one deliverable. Get it delivered. Step two is like, all right, how can we optimize? What can we do to improve it to get it smaller, faster, more efficient with better practices, possibly templatizable to reuse some of those ideas again. But yeah, I mean, if you're a single developer in a company and you're just learning Power BI and you need to get a report out for your manager using implicit measures and auto date time to get out a basic one-page, two-page report, it's not wrong. I mean, they wouldn't have those features there without having them kind of as a handicap and an easy guide for people just to quickly throw a report together, in a couple of hours. And then eventually you start reading the blogs and you realize that dedicated calendar tables are good. The one downside I will say to the auto date time is that a lot of people, because there's a date parser. If you have auto date time and you do, like, let's say fact order date, and then you put a period after it, it will actually let you parse out the day, the month, the quarter, and the year. As soon as you turn off auto date, that doesn't exist for custom calendar tables. That part only exists for those. So you actually have to go through and fix all of these calculations that instantly break when you delete that. So that's the one downside, is it's a really cool parser that's even built into DAX that allows you to call upon all these other dimensions to it. But it does make upgrading it later on a little bit more painful. And annoyingly, quick measures with time intelligence only work with auto date. And I find that really stupid,
Oh, is it?
honestly. Yeah. So like rolling average, if you try to drag, even if your calendar table has been set as a calendar table and you've done everything correctly on the implementation, if you try to drag calendar date into there, it will say it only works with auto date time functions. It will not. You cannot do a quick measure rolling average with anything but the the auto calendar table built into your fact table with that turned on. And
Hmm.
I feel like that would not be difficult to rewrite the DAX code to accept custom calendar tables as long as it has been turned on as a calendar table and it has a unique identifier of a data type for the key. So I think it's a huge reason that probably quick measures aren't as used as they are. Is it like other than multiplication, subtraction, basic things, all time intelligence breaks with a basic model, and they're just completely useless unless you go through and
Hmm.
rip out the code and edit it yourself. But at that point, you might as well just write your own and get a template off of SQL BI.
Yeah, 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 for sure, for sure. No, I don't use quick measures, so I didn't know that. Well, good to know.
Yeah,
Good to know.
it's I mean, and I think a small plug to the video I just did on Tuesday with Didier is the new DAX templates that is built in to side tools really is and will be everything that quick measures should have been from the get-go, but with hopefully a much better library and everything else. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm
Cool.
still really happy and I appreciate that you like back in what April, I you said like I get a message from you on LinkedIn like, "Oh, hey, there's this person who I just like I saw his tool that he built
Yeah.
recently. It's really cool." And like I've never heard of this tool before and I looked in like why don't more people know about this? But like you should have him on your live stream and it's taken off like gangbusters now. I'm happy he's working with Mike. It's now part of Business Ops, and they're creating a DAX template repository. But it's really cool to, and especially as he's described it, I just wanted to build a bunch of tools for things that would help me as a developer, and I just realized that it would be useful to share it with others. But almost everything in that he's built because it was tools that were missing from other external tools that he wanted as part of his own development experience. And I think like
Yeah.
those are the best stories with cool custom tools. Is it's somebody who got excited and built it for themselves, but it just happens to be useful for a lot of other people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He shares them with everybody. He's really good. He's really good. So I'm really happy that you took him in because
He's in the
no,
chat
I'm
by the
not
way too.
into.
Yeah,
Oh, hi.
yeah,
Oh, cool. I hope it explodes in usage.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know with the business ops, I think that gets a huge amount of downloads. That should help it out quite a bit. I had a really interesting question, and I'll see if you can grasp it. So, would you like to see Microsoft introduce actual and time intelligence rather than current period time intelligence? The only thing
Hmm.
I can think of for current period is, I mean, there is functions for that, but and then there's also the relative slicer. So I'm not sure I follow the question 100%. If you maybe wanted to drop a bit more into the chat, I'm not sure uh, if you were able to understand this one.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. So, one of the things with time intelligence, sometimes the name will fool you about what it actually does. Like
Fair.
you expect with that name that it will calculate something else. Maybe that's what it means. Like
I,
year to date, for
yeah.
example, it calculates just year to date for the current year, but then if you go back, it will give you the entire year. Like,
Here we go. So when he says time intelligence, he actually means time intelligence. When we call it time intelligence, it's really date.
oh,
It's really date. Yeah, it's so better
is
said. It
it?
actually should be called date intelligence. Very rarely is anything ever down to the second. You know, uh, but
Oh,
there are
I
some
see.
people who do work with it like that. So yeah, there aren't a ton of functions that do that. They have added more and more abilities to drill down to the second and millisecond level, both in functions in Power Query, commands in Power Query, and in DAX. So they're adding to those sets. But yeah, I agree that there's not as it's the tool set is not as robust for date time as it is with date. I'll let you uh, provide some insight onto this, but I think this will actually be a perfect segue afterwards to one last it depends scenario about date time.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, not much to add. I've done not a lot, but I've done some reports to the second too. Yeah, you need to figure it out basically. So there's nothing out of the box that will work. And
Yep,
not sure why. Maybe live data was not the main purpose in the beginning, and that's why seconds perhaps is not that interesting. But it's
fair.
becoming more and more actual with big data. Power BI will being able to handle more and more volume of data and having live connections and direct queries and all that stuff. So hopefully it will come.
And I do think that, yeah, to the that can segue into a good last it depends scenario, which is do you have a date time table, or do you have it like you split it? Generally for me, like if you have date and time data in your fact table at that level, uh, I will usually take the column, split it into a date and time column, and then also have a separate date and time calendar table. One of the reasons being is if you actually have a date time master calendar table, that is a row for every second of every hour of every minute of every day of every year. That will be a really, really large calendar table, like hundreds of thousands, if probably not, no, like millions and millions of rows, and you will be very, very slow. Uh, one benefit is you can, do a date time slider and have a single slicer for that, but having a date and a time slicer separately onto the page, it's one or two extra clicks to be able to get to the right day and the time window that you want, but you've also just gutted out 80% of the extra storage space that you needed to in the model. So I definitely recommend it to split as far as possible for model optimization.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And I always challenge is like, do you really need the time? Like most of the time, most data sets do not need the time. It's just that they recorded time, but
Yep.
you then don't use it in the actual report. So can we get rid of it? And most of the
Mhm.
times it's a yes. So
And
just get rid of it.
to that exact point, like I had a great video on a pain point that I've now been told by the Power BI team. Hopefully there will be a prompt on this, but it's a date time issue. So in Power BI, uh, in the Vertipack engine, there is no data type for date. It's only date time. If you import a date into the model, it might be formatted to look like a date, and you think it is, and even though the data type is set to date, which is kind of, to me, that's a red herring. It's a false positive. It's telling you it's a data type even though there is only date time, but it will import it like 1/1/2021, 12 a.m. It will actually have a time element on there. It's just it doesn't display. Uh, so if you actually import it from your data source, if you import something with date and time in it that actually has a timestamp, in the model, if you change it from date time to date, it actually doesn't change the data type. It does not cut off the time. All it does is format it to remove it. It keeps the time and it stores it in there. So if you try to key it to a calendar table that just has date only, technically all of those dates are stored as the date with 12 a.m. next to it. So now you're doing January 1st, 12 a.m. with like January 1st, 2:45 p.m. or something. So like the key doesn't actually work. Both of them are set to date. Everything in the model looks correct and the information looks like it should align, but it won't key up. You have to actually go to Power Query and you have to convert it from date time to date. Yeah. And I did a video on that to help get some exposure, and then I sent it to Microsoft and says, hey, this to me is a big issue. Like everything about this tells the user this is set to date, and people think that there is a date data type. So at a minimum, if you change it from date time to date in the model in the Vertipack engine, give a soft prompt to say, hey, there is no date data type. If you actually need to convert this, please open up the query editor to make the change. Thankfully, there's a video, and I've had so many people comment, oh my God, I've had a headache on this for a week. I couldn't figure out what the problem was. So clearly it's a pain point, but I really do hope they fix that issue because it's very, very hidden unless you are experienced on the types, because most people will assume, oh, any type in Power Query as a data type, that there's going to be the same data type in the model, right? Like, why wouldn't they have everything that would align with each other? But there are less data types in Power in the actual Vertipack engine upon import than there is that that you can have when you're in the query transformation. But that was a huge, big like red flag that I did a video on, just because it's, oh, nobody's ever going to realize this unless they can come across a Google search for this on the web.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, hopefully they'll fix it.
Yeah, I mean, it's never going to get fixed in the sense that they're never going to not let you click data, do a conversion data type. But my understanding, I think that it seemed like they were 80-90% considering. And thankfully, Jeffrey Wang was on a thread from that, and it's like, that's something we will, sometime on the pipeline we'll integrate some kind of a friendly warning to at least explain what's happening, because that's all I need is I just want users to know they have to go to the transform to make that change. And it doesn't happen often, where you try to convert it, but there's been a couple of times where I was building it out in it. I think I probably spent half a day completely just throwing my hands up, like, I don't understand why this connection is not working. These values, to my eyes right now, they both say 1
They look
2021.
the
Why
same.
aren't they connecting? Yeah. And
Yeah.
thankfully, I have a Slack channel of MVPs that I can talk to. We're like, all right, can somebody look at this workbook? What's the problem? Oh, yeah. Technically, it's being stored as date time right now. Like, great. That is not clear whatsoever. That's probably, of all the little annoyances that I have with Power BI, that's probably my number one. There's other things where I wish this button was here instead of there. That's the only one that I think really is like misleading in a sense. So you know,
Yeah,
it will be nice when they patch it a little bit, so to speak.
yeah. No, I normally set always the data types in Power Query. So, or if there is a data time, I strip it from Power Query always. I don't know why
Yeah.
I do it. So thankfully, I have the problem. What I have had the problem is when I import, and then I forget to put the data state in Power Query. So I have text and date, and then I put
Yep.
the relationships, and then I was like, nothing works. Like, why? Then I remember, oh my
Yep.
god. Yeah.
Well, and that's kind
But
of the other thing too, is there are two model changes that normally push back to Power Query. If you rename a column, it adds an applied step to rename the column. If I was to change the data type from, let's assume text to binary. Let's say I have a text column that says true, false. If I change that to binary, it will actually change it to the binary data type true, false. It adds an applied step. If you change from date time to date, there is no applied step added. It does not actually make a change in Power Query. So there's one of those other exceptions where all these other things do it a certain way, but and that's why, honestly, I think that's one of the reasons that I did it in the model is, oh yeah, it's going to put a change type in the applied step, so this is totally fine. That way I don't have to open the query editor, and I found later out on. So it's those little things where patterns are broken that people don't realize that are the good gotchas. But that's why individuals like us
yeah.
try to blog about those as much as we can.
Exactly. That's one of those things where it's good to have a video somewhere or a blog or the community post where it actually tells you like, hey, this problem with filters disappearing. Like, you set up especially happens with when you sync slicers and then you delete the slicers and then
Yeah.
the slicer is still there, it's just hidden. And oh my god, I
Mm,
spent hours and then until I figured out what was wrong.
yep.
That drove me nuts. I have a video. People always comment on that video because when they get that problem, they've been searching for hours. And then when we finally see what the problem is, like, oh my god, thank you so much. I'm so happy I made it because I wasn't going to make a video. Like, who is going to? I was like, I do it.
That's actually
It's proven useful.
one little tip to that is I'm sure you use this as well, is the filter context icon that lets you see what's currently applied is a godsend sometimes when it comes to trying
Yeah.
to reverse engineer. However, though, if you've hidden that filter, you don't know it's there anymore. I've found through trial and error a couple of times now because there are certain things where, as an example, if you have a current year filter on that visual, but the title says current year sales, you don't really need it to be in the filter. That it colors it up from other filters that are important to know. So you normally want to hide that. But there have been a couple of times where I've missed a filter because during development, I've hidden a couple and I don't realize it's applying to it anymore. So my practice now that I try to recommend is, as part of the final cleanup process, once all the pages have been added and anything else, go through the visuals, check those icons, and from there decide from your fields list
Which
which ones you want to lock and hide. But that should be one of your last steps because otherwise you might end up forgetting that is filtering this if they're hidden from that. So again, it's a kind of a trial and error thing. I normally just I make a visual and I hide it as part of the finalization per visual. Now I do it at the very end of the development process just because of that.
yeah, me too. I always wait until the end
Hmm.
just because it always changes so much.
Yeah,
You never know what
exactly.
is going to stay and what is going to change. So yeah,
Yep.
definitely.
I do know we're getting been some great conversations. We've got about an hour and 40 minutes into this, but I do think this can be probably a good time to start wrapping up. These conversations have
Yeah.
been really fun. I love this, and I think we had peak concurrence of the low to mid 40s, which is really really cool. So I'm glad everybody stuck through this, and we still have about 26 people hanging out with us at the moment. So
Cool.
uh,
Cool. One thing to wrap it up, do you know
mm,
who Alberto
yeah.
Cairo is?
Say the name again.
Alberto Cairo. He's been on one of these Microsoft Ignite keynotes. He's one of
Oh,
the
yeah.
visualization kings.
Hmm.
Yeah. So he wrote a tweet like 2-3 days ago. I was about to ping you, but then I said, I'm not going to disturb you. But you wrote a tweet that he says, okay, any visual is good if it works. Like there were people commenting low, like pie charts are bad, or 3Ds are bad, or
Yeah.
there's so many opinions, especially in the visualization world, about
Hmm.
what you should not use. And I love this comment, like if it works, if you understand it, then it's good. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's a pie chart. It doesn't matter if it is a 3D chart. If it works, it's good. And I think the same applies for best practices or for any practice.
I
If
agree.
it works, if we are trying to do works, if you're doing a lot of custom columns, but the model is not too slow and it's useful and it's, you can use it, it's good. Go. You don't need to have a perfect model. You don't need to have a perfect nothing. If it's good, if it works, it's good. Do it.
There's a paraphrase version of that in English, which is if it looks stupid but it works, it's not stupid.
There you go.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Exactly. I mean, it's sometimes like, yeah, and I think to what I mentioned earlier, it's just that with reporting or anything else, step one is, does it allow people to like get to a decision, and is it showing the correct data? Both of those are met. That's all you need to really have a deliverable. Then you go to performance tuning, optimization, enhancements, all the other stuff. It's like sometimes just, a working deliverable that does it what it needs to do. That's a very okay phase one to have without needing to be caught up in like having to have it perfect. Yeah. Great point.
Definitely. And I think nobody should be ashamed of having too many custom columns or to put in whatever prefix inside whatever, or whatever works for you. If it works, just do it. And then obviously if somebody complains, just modify it and improve it. Absolutely. Learn from it. But don't be shy of or stop doing or learning just because somebody told you that it's not a best practice. Who cares? If it works, go.
I liked this phrase too. Don't lose the good in the effort to get the best. It's
oh, nice.
The phrase diminishing returns. If you're on a scale of like a cross section of effort to output and quality, at some point you hit 80-85%. Sure, you can spend double the hours to get an extra 5%, but is it worth it? So where is the effort best maximized? And I mean, I'm OCD, so I definitely have. There's been times where I get stuck on wanting to perfect it, and then I realize, wait, does anybody else besides me actually care about this extra effort going into it? Probably not. Nobody's gonna notice other than me. It's like I have other things that I can be doing right now, so just get it out the door. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on today. This has been a blast. So.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening for so long. We really appreciate it.
Enjoy the rest of your night. And yeah, like at some point we'll definitely have to find another fun topic to do again in the future.
Definitely. And enjoy your trip to Peru.
I'm excited. Yeah, I'm packed and ready to go, and then I'll be about 2.5 weeks down there, so I'm very excited.
Super cool.
All right.
Great.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships as well. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on social media to help pass on this awesome content and to help the channel grow. So until next time.